There's something about SpongeBob that I can't stop thinking about. From a floating ship at the bottom of the sea, which makes no sense at all, to this thing. Yeah, it can be weird sometimes, but the more I watch SpongeBob, I realize how creative, memorable, and dark the episodes can really be. Mostly every episode comes with a deeper meaning than what it shows on the surface. In this case, I'm talking specifically about the episode called SB-129, where Squidward gets trapped in an everlasting state of anxiety riddled with a feeling of loneliness. On the surface, it doesn't sound like a good idea for a kid's show, but the writers managed to make it entertaining while at the same time giving us a deeper meaning about life itself. SB-129 is about Squidward trying to get alone time from SpongeBob and Patrick, which leads him to accidentally locking himself in a freezer for over 2,000 years, causing him to wake up in the future. He finds Spongetron, who helps him escape the freezer, only to realize everything is completely covered in chrome with multiple Spongetrons right in front of him, causing this iconic scene right here. He then uses a time travel machine from the future to go back to the past, finding primitive versions of SpongeBob and Patrick. He finally finds a place alone to play his clarinet when he's chased by SpongeBob and Patrick because of how awful his music is, and runs back into the time travel machine where he breaks the lever trying to get to the present time, causing him to land in what I like to call SpongeBob limbo. A lot of shows and movies display what time travel could potentially look like, but none of them show what lies between the past, present, and future. This is exactly why I love this episode of SpongeBob, as it shows us what time travel looks like outside of the linear timeline, and uses this interesting concept as a way to say that life is meaningless and isn't worth fighting against. I gotta get out of here! There's theories out there that say Squidward died in this limbo realm, and that does seem like a valid theory, but I personally think that if that were the case, why would he still carry his clarinet around? Wouldn't it just be himself in this land of nowhere, detached from anything physical? Something to consider is that Squidward may be experiencing this event as an internal crisis rather than it actually happening in the real world. We can see this later in the episode as he falls through the ceiling of the time machine, meaning that all the empty space and warping that happened never really took place in the real world, but only in his head. I think that's why the clarinet was shown throughout the episode, to show that Squidward didn't actually die and is only fighting his own mind. What this episode references is a philosophical idea called eternal recurrence, which was a thought experiment conducted by someone named Friedrich Nietzsche in his book The Gay Science. This idea means that all events in the world repeat themselves in the same sequence through an eternal series of cycles. We can see throughout the episode where this idea is displayed, where we can see Squidward running off in the distance only to show up where he just was a few minutes ago, and how SpongeBob and Patrick are holding on to their favorite activity of jellyfishing for over 2,000 years.
Somebody say jellyfishing?
It seems like a never-ending loop, which I'll come back to later. One key scene that expands this ideology is the part where the word alone is chanted over and over again. This is consequently described by Friedrich, where eternal recurrence only happens at our loneliest moments in life. And this loneliness isn't the feeling when you are alone in your house for the day, but more of a loneliness you would feel if you're having an existential crisis, just like what Squidward was experiencing. It makes complete sense considering Squidward isn't attached to reality, and time seems meaningless. The moment this loneliness sets in for Squidward is when he realizes he is completely and utterly detached from everyone and everything he has known, besides of course his clarinet. He goes from being relieved that he's away from SpongeBob and Patrick,
They're finally gone!
to now feeling the fear of being alone as the episode progresses.
I wanna go home!
This then causes Squidward to have a complete transformation within himself, which is also noted from an article about this topic written by Justin Remhoff, a professor from Old Dominion University. His article suggests that there's a transformation in the mind of someone that experiences this specific type of loneliness, the exact kind that Squidward is experiencing. This idea is validated as it triggers Squidward to say that he misses SpongeBob, causing him to snap back to reality.
I even miss SpongeBob! SpongeBob! Patrick!
What this really shows us in return is what happens when you crave loneliness, only to want the opposite. This episode of SpongeBob poses a question related to this argument, which is why do we want change, only to want the opposite when change is given to us? Similarly speaking, what about social relationships want us to feel alone? And what about being alone wants us to have social relationships? This follows the philosophy of it being just one big cycle, a continuous loop of craving for change, no matter what side of the spectrum you're on. As Squidward comes back down to reality after having a self-transformation, the cycle is perfectly displayed by how Squidward is immediately upset at SpongeBob, and once again craves being alone.
Does this mean you wanna go jellyfishing?
No!
As we can see, these two sides of the story cancel each other out in an abstract way while driving the idea home that nothing really matters. If there is no solution or an end to this unbreakable loop, then what is the point in anything? Something to consider, which I haven't talked about yet, which ties this idea together, is this scene right here.
Future!
Squidward seems to be doing crunches while saying future over and over again. At first, it probably seems funny and a little confusing, but the reason for this is not what you'd expect. Using the same ideology for the past, present, and future, Squidward realizes that no matter what point in time he's in, he will never escape the mental state of being in the present. And this applies to people as well, as none of us can live in the future or the past. Even if we had our own time travel machine, no matter what point in time we are in, we would be experiencing the present. Everything that I have said up to this point is in the past. Think about that for a second. Going back to the crunches, Squidward is trying to convince himself he is living in the present, but in the future of what was his present, with the crunches symbolizing the same thing as pinching yourself to wake yourself up in a dream. That being said, Squidward understands who he is in the past, present, and future, but when he lands in limbo, the narrative changes, causing him to have an existential crisis of self, not knowing who he is, where he is, and what time he is in. And the thought of that can be frightening for anyone to experience. As this episode presents us with the ideology of nothing matters, I don't think it ends in a terrible way, considering it is a kid's show, but also because Squidward comes to the realization of acceptance of his situation through self-development, rather than hating what he can't control outside of himself. I think we can all take bits and pieces of this way of thinking that Squidward ultimately comes to into our own lives as it applies to all of us. The moment you are able to accept your situation for what it is the moment you will experience growth. Thank you for watching, and let me know your own opinions on this episode so others can see your viewpoint as well.